Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there, this is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franze Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franze Show, a behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franze.
Well, hello, and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franze, and this is your backstage pass to the music industry. This week, we get to talk with an entertainment attorney. We get to talk with Josh Lastine. We'll talk to him about the role of managers and lawyers, the value of networking, and we'll discuss what to look for in a contract. Now, Josh, he is not only a great attorney, he is a great person, and I can't wait to talk with him tonight. However, joining me to talk with Josh tonight is Keith Sensing, one of my best friends, an audio engineer, and an educator. So if you would like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jayfranze.com. Now, let's get started. Josh, sir, how are you?
Hey, Jay. Hey, Keith. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and dive in, sir. I know you have one hell of a background. You have your own law firm. Why don't we just start with the law firm since I brought it up? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I'm the managing partner of Lastine Entertainment Law. We're a transactional law firm here in Beverly Hills. Transactional meaning we don't go to court. We don't wear a suit and tie. We don't argue in front of a judge. We strictly do contract negotiations, contract drafting, contract reading, writing, analyzing contracts for a wide range of both corporations and talent in the entertainment space. So while my practice primarily consists of helping studios and production companies on the film and TV side and working directly more so with actors, writers, directors, and producers, I do have a fair amount of clients in the music space, whether that's band members or music managers or people on the ADR side or touring. So, there's a lot of crossover between all of the medias, whether that's TV, film, music, new media, anyone who needs a contract drafted or negotiated, anyone who's getting paid to perform services creatively, that's my wheelhouse, is to help them negotiate the contract, help them get the best deal that's available to them on the table, but just make sure that, what they're signing is kosher is really what I do.
Contracts. Is there enough work just doing contracts and that type of stuff to keep you busy?
Oh boy. Yeah, no, there's enough contracts to keep all of Hollywood pretty busy, and for people to very, very much specialize in various things. So, there's film and TV and more traditional media like music, or even getting as granular as getting into influencer deals. I myself have gotten a lot more into negotiating podcast deals and working in that area. NFTs, while that was still really popular, that was a very popular area for some lawyers to work in. But even, looking just at something as simple as TV and film, well, for every TV show, you have traditional lawyers who work in development and production, like myself. That's the ideation phase and the actual putting together of film and TV shows, lights, camera, action. But then you have other attorneys that do work at the corporate level and work on corporate mergers and acquisitions, or you have attorneys that work in the litigation department that are handling defamation cases or slip and falls and accidents on set. You have marketing attorneys that oversee marketing campaigns and fine print as it relates to, sweepstakes and promotions. So, it really is a lawyer almost behind every facet of the media industry, working in tangent with producers, with writers, with talent to create, for lack of a better word, content. I hate to call it content, but, just collectively the idea of creating consumable media or consumable entertainment.
All right. You mentioned a couple of things I want to make sure that we touch on throughout that. Let's start with management. I know a lot of people, especially working in the music business, they lean towards having an entertainment attorney be their manager. You're talking as if they're two separate roles. So can you kind of tell me a little bit more about that relationship?
Yeah, and in music, the lines are not as narrowly defined. In music, I think that there are players that wear much more hats. In terms of television and film, it is much more common that people, quote unquote, stay in their lanes. For some lawyers that offer that service, I don't think that that's uncommon, so to speak. I consider myself a momager of sorts, where I'm holistically looking out for my client. Momager. It's real, yes, part of my job is to look out for their legal interests, but I'm also, with that falls a lot of other things. So, to the extent we're advising holistically on their career, we kind of wear that manager hat, but I wouldn't say that we are that line in terms of getting you in front of people, getting you kind of seen and getting you heard.
Okay. So what do you think the number one legal mistake is by any artist in the entertainment industry?
Honestly, if you truly do not know what you're doing, don't sign something, because there are a lot of people that will misrepresent what a contract says, or tell you it's a contract for one thing and it's actually a contract for something completely different. I've had this happen to me a number of times, especially in the music space, where I've had clients come to me with quote unquote manager contracts, and looking at the fine print of those manager contracts, and they're really structured and set up as partnership agreements where the manager is taking equity, they're taking ownership of the artist and their work. That's very different than a manager deal. And if you don't know the difference, then that's really where I see the biggest. If we're just talking straight out of the starting gate, people get confused from the get-go, the terminology and what the different types of contracts are. And some people will call it one thing and they'll try to explain it this way. And it's not always even, how do I say, malicious or intentional. I'm in the middle of this huge thing for a client with a podcast right now, where there were a lot of back and forth promises, a lot of he said, she said before I came aboard. And now there's, no written record of what was agreed to. There's a lot of misunderstandings on both sides' ends. I'm now kind of stepping in the middle and trying to play cleanup, but it would be a lot nicer and a lot less messy had they had an attorney from the get-go, if they had somebody in the room that was shepherding the deal, supervising the deal, saying to the client, this is a good deal, this is a bad deal. No, you don't want to structure the deal as a minimum guarantee. You want to structure it as a signing bonus or an event, but really, my job is to get clients what I like to call past the smell test to some degree, where it's like, if I'm on the phone and someone's making trying to make a deal for my client, and I'm hearing it and it's not really adding up, an artist should not be as concerned with that. An artist should be concerned with art.
All right. You're talking about the separation between management and some of the deals that people get themselves into, like Keith was mentioning. So what do you feel like that role of a manager should be?
So in music, a manager acts more akin to an agent in the way that a film or TV agent cultivates the career of their talent. They're, helping them book studio sessions. They're helping them manage their life, because honestly, their job full-time should be working and crafting their art.
So at what stage of that do you think that they should get involved?
How do I say? If you are truly talented, if you do have kind of the chops and people have told you that, get out there and just start making those meetings and those connections. It's never too soon to start networking with an agent, a manager, and an entertainment lawyer, regardless of whether you're a musician or an actor.
Let's say I'm a down on my luck podcaster. That's not so hard to imagine. But, networking. What would you suggest networking?
Podcast conventions, and probably the biggest one, I guess, would be VidCon that just took place a couple weekends ago in Anaheim. It's one of the largest podcast influencer digital new media kind of spheres for people. I was down there that weekend, and the variety of people from young to old, because it is YouTube, podcast, new media, it's not really one generation, finding where the people are, which is, how do I say, challenging in 2024, yet because of, I don't know, COVID or whatever, there's really not that many people out. It's not that hard to find the people that are out because there isn't that many of them. But you do have to plug yourself into communities, plug yourself into the local music scene in whatever city you live in, the live music scene. LinkedIn is a vastly underrated resource for artists, because there are not that many artists on LinkedIn, and there are a million business people on LinkedIn. We use that as our Facebook, and there's a huge disconnect between talent and professionals on LinkedIn.
Very cool.
All right. So we talk about contracts, negotiations, those type of things. And we always hear the negotiation with the record label, but there's a lot more things to negotiate in the relationship between an artist and the industry. There could be the tours, there can be every contract along the way. It could be, like you said, the management contract itself. So what type of relationship should they be looking for with that manager before that manager starts reaching out on their behalf?
They want to solidify their agreement in at least some form of writing. I think that that's the biggest mistake that people make, is that they have this sort of handshake deal or this relationship that they've built via text message or through a series of email threads or a series of email conversations. And most of the time, in my experience, people are not very explicit and not very clear what it is their intentions are and what their expectations are. So just setting intentions and expectations in writing from the get-go is really important. And even too, to just get a litmus test of who you're dealing with. Any good professional is going to want to have that relationship kind of solidified and hammered out before they start taking on work on your behalf. There are a number of what I would like to call like template or boilerplate manager contracts online. Managers going to cultivate a relationship, procure work on artists' behalf, try to do things to get artists in front of people. Artist is going to give them a percentage of whatever they earn for deals that are covered over a certain period of time. You always want to make sure that you have a strong out clause, a strong termination provision.
All right, hold on. Before you get too deep into it, because I want to touch those too.
Okay.
But let's talk about the agreement. A couple things. You mentioned signing the contract. There's boilerplate contracts available. Would you recommend using a boilerplate contract?
It's better than not having anything.
It is better than not having. Okay.
It's better than not having anything. Part of that is like, yeah, you want to make sure that you have an audit provision, especially if it's the manager that's collecting money on your behalf.
Okay, so when a manager's collecting money, what is the average rate a manager should be taking from an artist these days?
15 to 20%.
0.2.
So 15, 20%, obviously negotiable. So you get an artist taking, or a manager taking 15, 20% from an artist. But again, at the beginning, when an artist doesn't have much coming in, they're relying heavily on that manager to get them the relationships, whether it be going into the studio, which costs money. It's not an area where you make money. It's an area where you're spending money to eventually get on the road and promote a product. So you go on the road, and that's where you're going to be making the money. So are we collecting money from the tour as well as merchandise, as well as everything that the artist touches?
What are we talking about, though? Are we talking about the artist management, or their business manager? Do you recommend that both of those roles combined, or should you split, the money from the artistic representation?
Again, caveating it all with, you have to, make the money to kind of allow for it. If you're making that kind of money, I highly recommend separating church and state from your personal manager and your business manager. And you kind of have to think about, you're building a cabinet, so to speak, of people who specialize in different things. Your personal manager specializes in you. They specialize in making sure you're performing your best and you're meeting the best people and you're getting the best opportunities, but they're not an accountant. They're not a financial advisor. They're not an investment broker. They don't know taxes. So to the extent you're making that kind of money, you should absolutely have an expert on your team who's advising that sort of business sense, and you make do with what you have, right? So a lawyer can help kind of advise, and a manager can kind of help advise, and an agent can kind of help advise, but the best of the best will have all of them each performing their specific roles siloed and doing their specialty, so to speak.
Well, sure. And at the beginning, I mean, you could have a personal manager, a business manager, a tour manager. I mean, there's several management verticals that you can have. But at the beginning, when you're just starting, you've got one person if you're lucky. And that one person is going to help you for a percentage of money that is not there yet. So if that person is there getting you that work, especially in the studio, which costs money, like we mentioned, so it typically comes out of their pocket. The artist doesn't have money and the manager believes in that person. They're investing money. So at that point, we get into the negotiation piece. So if they're putting money into an artist, now what happens to that 15, 20%? Are we taking a larger percentage? Are we putting money in and taking a certain dollar amount out before we get our percentage? I mean, how does that work?
Usually a manager will recoup their expenses in some way, shape, or form. I don't know a lot of managers that go extremely out of pocket for an artist. They got to really believe in an artist, where they're, again, going out of pocket, right? More than just making connections. But yeah, I'm assuming that they would try to recoup that as soon as possible from any sort of revenue that comes to the artist.
What grounds does an artist have at that point to negotiate with that manager?
It's a relationship. And like you said, when you're starting out, it may just be that one person wearing all those hats. You got to really trust the dynamic of that relationship, and you got to trust that that person can wear all those hats.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you, Josh. I mean, a lawyer should be the person you can trust because it's black and white. It should be black and white. Where a manager should have some something to bring to the table, and if that's typically their relationships.
I will say I love working with managers. I have a lot of managers that come to me because they have the relationships with the artists, but they don't have that knowledge or sophistication when it comes to negotiating contracts, and they don't know the difference between a collaboration agreement and a recording deal or this or that and the next thing. That's what I'm there for. I'm there to help the manager just as much as I'm there to help the artist, because ultimately we're aligned in our interests in getting our client the best deal or making them most famous, most amount of money, whatever their goals are, helping them reach their goals. Let's call it that.
All right. So you've mentioned a couple of times influencers and podcasters as well as artists. So what should an influencer or a podcaster be looking out for when it comes to contracts?
Yeah, this applies to both podcasters and people on the music front. But when you're getting any sort of advance, you're getting an upfront portion of money. You're getting paid essentially on future sales. And I think that that's oftentimes very confusing for artists, because artists will conflate recoupable, the old recoupable. This is very much applicable to a client that I have in a podcast space, but it, again, applies to music, where they thought that they were getting a upfront fee or a signing bonus or some sort of fixed fee. It was actually in advance, and it was recoupable against future sales. And so if I could have been there for her when she was initially negotiating that deal to get under the hood, so to speak, with the podcast company to say, hey, look, this is a signing bonus. This is not advance. This is not a minimum guarantee. This is in no way recoupable. They kind of pulled a switcheroo. So, just knowing the difference between an upfront fee and what an advanced recoupment schedule is.
So, all right, let's talk about this revenue thing. Over the last decades or so, it's that wonderful 360 deal. I didn't know that recoupables were even part of the podcast world, but I guess any entertainment. I knew it was heavy in music business. What's your general thoughts on 360 deals, and what should you watch out for?
I think it's never been a better time to make a living as an artist, but it's never been a harder time to become a superstar or become super financially wealthy by being an artist. I think that the opportunities that exist out there now, it's so great to see how many people can now fulfill their dreams in becoming X, Y, and Z influencer, podcaster, TikTok star, whatever have you. But because of there's so much talent on the market, so to speak, those deals are not going to be the best deals out there. And you have to realize you're playing a long-term game in your career, and you may start out here, but it's really about getting to here. So, it's a risk reward analysis. You might be getting into a deal with somebody and it may not be the best deal. You might not think it's, a perfect deal for you, but if you're getting a little bit further, if you're moving the football a little bit, that's how you build leverage to get to where Taylor Swift is so she can command those deals. You're right. You have to start out at the bottom, but then you strategically work your way up and get better deals slowly but surely over time.
Well, as you bring that back to the artist, and we're talking about typically deals with record labels, I don't necessarily see an issue with recouping costs that are put out. You said that, you have to verify that those costs are legitimate. But if you're spending money on my behalf, once money comes in, I should be paying that money back first, and then we all share on the money that's coming after that point. So I don't necessarily see an issue with a recoupment, but it's when you start reaching into the pocket for every other expense that you don't typically have something to do with. So where do we draw the line, and how do we negotiate those type of deals?
And I think part of it comes down to leverage. If you command those, those talented pieces, you can say, hey, look, I've had a YouTube channel, or I've had an influencer deal, or I've had this, that, merchandising page. If I'm getting in bed with you, you're not adding to that because those things already exist. You're adding to this other field. If you're completely just starting out and they are helping you set up those revenue streams, those outlets, I don't know, there's probably an argument to be made that they should make some portion of it back. But I do think that artists don't realize that things are more negotiable than they think.
But my concern is this. So now you have the personal manager, the business manager, all of these people are taking a piece, which just means a percentage. So at what point do you now become tapped out?
Very quickly. It's tough. It's a numbers game in terms of making sure that you're not giving up too much of the pie. And you have to be very conscious of that. And you have to be very conscious of what value, what parties are bringing what value to the table. And if you are making those revenue streams, I think it's easy, not easy, but it's worth having that conversation to say, hey, look, like with my clients, I don't take a percentage. If I'm doing a percentage deal, if I'm doing a commission deal for my clients, I'll only take a percentage on those deals that I actually negotiate. So if it's a personal appearance and they make money off of it, that's great. If they want to involve me in the contract, I'll take my percentage. If they don't want to involve me in the contract, then I don't get my cut.
Well, in that case, you take a higher fee.
So there are a lot of agents and managers that will just take a fee without having any involvement. They'll just invoice you for the amount and collect.
Well, in your case, I mean, it's going to either be a fee or a percentage.
Yeah.
A starting out artist, what leverage do you have?
Leverage, personal one-on-one leverage. When I started, I think, negotiating contracts fresh out of law school, 2012, 2013, it really felt like the purpose of contracts was to hide the ball and to screw people over and to really kind of hide the ball, to get people to sign things that may not be what's in their best interest, right? I now, with all of the resources, with the chat GPT, with the access to the internet, with the access to entertainment lawyers, I hope people are a little bit more savvy and sophisticated. Contracts are becoming much more plain English to read. And so you really should take time to sit down and read it and say, what does this mean? What does that mean? And have that personal relationship. Because I can tell you that if the other side gets angry or frustrated or whatever, they may not be the best business partner for you.
Well, that happens a lot with artists. They usually get, offended or upset that they don't make it as quickly as they would expect to. And when artists don't make it quickly, they want to abandon all deals that they have. When in reality, it takes time, and very few artists make it to the finish line. So the fact that it takes a while for things to build up,
true.
especially in a town like Nashville, where they call it a 10-year town, that it takes time to make these things happen and to make these relationships work, to get an artist into a studio, to put a record together, to promote that record, to get that artist on the road, to get them selling tickets and merchandise and all of the rest of the stuff that goes along with it. So it's got to be tough on your part as well as a manager's part to keep that artist on track. So what do you do? How do you keep that artist on track?
I have a very close interpersonal relationship with my clients. I check in on them regularly. I'm constantly sending them articles about things that I think that might be interested in their particular space. If I see a job listing or a job post or something that somebody's looking for, somebody who fits my artist description, I will immediately plug them. I'll immediately send them, materials, even though that's not really my role as the attorney. I'm always looking for opportunities on behalf of my clients. And, part of my, what I like to offer as part of my services is, when you sign up to become a client, all of the clients of Lastine Entertainment Law are trying to go places. So the more clients we sign, the higher up we go.
So are your clients on retainer? Are they regular clients? Because earlier we started off by saying transactional.
So I have mostly clients on retainer or flat rate clients, hourly clients, but I do a fair amount of percentage clients, in which case I kind of consider those hip pocketed clients, meaning I'll work with them when they have deals, but I may not talk to them every single day.
Now, you're also in Beverly Hills, and you're an attorney. There's all sorts of reputations that go along with that. How do you fight that reputation?
Try to stay as down to earth and humble as possible. I'm from a small town. I'm from the middle of nowhere, Iowa. Always knew I wanted to work in Hollywood. Always knew I wanted to work on the film, TV, the production side of making things. And that's where absolutely I ended up. And, I've negotiated deals with Kevin Feige, and I've been on the receiving end of phone calls that from Harvey Weinstein and stuff, and it's just like they're just people. It's just a place. It's just a job.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take this into touring. So if we're on the road and we've got musicians, that's primarily where they make their money these days. So what type of things should they be looking out for when they're on the road?
I think first and foremost, when you're on the road, you need to be comfortable. You need to make sure that you're having what you need to perform the best at what it is that you do. So make sure that if there are not necessarily unreasonable things, but like if you need fucking M&Ms backstage, right, or
we make jokes about food and catering all the time. Food and catering is honestly one of my favorite parts of going on the road or going out with artists. But there's other things. I mean, you have to, align backline for the instrumentation. You have the engineering staff that's going to engineer your show live. You have to have the crew that's going to set it up. You have to deal with the local unions that are going to work with you in order to get those things done. So I know we always make the jokes about food, and that's definitely a priority. But there's a lot of things that go into this. And again, we have to start thinking about road management at this point. So at what point do you think it's important for an artist to get a road manager, and how do we negotiate the deals from that point?
If you're setting up something that involved, if you're actually putting on and hosting the facilities or in some way taking on the liability, whether that's yourself personally or through your company, then you absolutely want to hire some sort of manager, some sort of person on hand to actually help you put on those events. Starting an LLC, starting an Inc. Corp, starting some sort of corporation where you're dispelling liability, where you're entering those contracts through another entity, so it's not on your persons. That's probably the first thing that you can do in terms of protecting yourself. At least some sort of business manager, somebody who's familiar with contracts, look and review and advise on those things.
An artist and a band is essentially nothing but a business. They're a small business. So do you recommend that they become an LLC right from the beginning?
Yeah, no, that's probably the best thing that they can do, because that's going to force them to sit down and work on the hardest part of that relationship, which is the band membership agreement, laying out exactly what the terms and relationships are of the band members, how they own the band, how the band operates, what happens when you want to kick somebody out of the band, or somebody's in breach of the band, or somebody wants to leave the band. These are all really important conversations to have with your bandmates. And it sounds kind of silly if you're just hanging out in your garage, but there will come a time when it actually does matter, and you want to have that stuff in writing before it does matter.
All right, sir. Well, we do this thing here we call Unsung Hero, where we take a moment to shine the light on somebody who's worked behind the scenes or somebody who may have supported you along the way. Do you have anybody you'd like to shine a little light on?
Yeah, I'll shout out my assistant Lulu, my executive assistant Lulu out of Texas. She's a rising musician, rising artist as well. She's instrumental in making sure that I get to where I'm going and answering my calls and making sure that my life stays on straight. So shout out to Lulu.
A big thanks to Josh for taking the time to share his stories with us. A big thanks to Keith for joining me tonight. And thank you for taking the time to hang with me here. I really do appreciate it. If you know anyone that would enjoy hearing Josh's story, please be sure to share this episode. You can do that and find the links to everything mentioned over at jayfranze.com/episode 84. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Franze Show. Make sure you visit us at jayfranze.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.